It is Friday, September 17th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone. We've got yet another somewhat lengthy show here just based on all the details that we learned about for these PS4 and PS5 games that were recently showcased, so we'll be going over all that. But first, as always, our PS Plus reminder, the September games are now available. Grab them, download them, add them to your library, and for our first story, let's quickly touch on PS5 System Software Update 21.02, 0.4.0. It's just... the naming convention this time around is not really all that fun. Sony's actually, they're dubbing it the September update because it's not really... the numbers they're using don't roll off the tongue. But anyway, I'm sure a lot of you probably saw this. It's a pretty large firmware update, so we're talking more than 40 changes, fixes, improvements, quality of life updates for that firmware. And of course, the big one is the ability to finally install your own M.2 SSD, which we did a separate tutorial for finally. I would have loved to get that out sooner, but Sony doesn't want to give me any sort of betas or any sort of access whatsoever, but that's fine. I wanted to put out as condensed of a tutorial as I could. But anyway, if you want to see how to properly install one, the hard part is just making sure you pick the right drive. We did that alongside showcasing all 40 features because it's easy to overlook all the features that were available in there, so you can also check that out as well. Honestly, my favorite, all the trophy improvements. In fact, the trophy tracker is going to be very helpful, so I can't wait to really start using that when I get back to playing some games. But the one thing that we didn't cover was PS4 firmware 9.0, not nearly as large, unfortunately, and not entirely surprising, but we still got a lot of, well, there's some similarities here, and I suspect that we'll be seeing this for PS4 when it comes to the last few updates that this system will really see. Some of the important ones, like the parent and guardian feature for being able to request more playtime, so that's in there. You can also use cellular data for remote play on PS4 as well, which I believe that's not actually live, so that and watching share play videos will come later for an update to these to those separate apps for remote play and the PlayStation mobile app. You can also select preferences for how to receive promotional notifications, just like on PS5, blocking someone and getting the option to leave parties that you're both in right away. That's also there. If you're the owner of a party and delete it, it's deleted for everyone. And you can now view PS5 trophies in your own trophy list, which is probably the most notable thing there, really, I guess. So nothing major, and I think this has happened for a lot of the recent PS4 firmwares, but it seems like there's a handful of people having problems with installing it. I don't know what's going on there. It seems like that's happened for a lot of the previous major big number PS4 firmware, so not sure what's going on. We'll probably see another like 9.01 come out very soon for PS4, but for right now at least, that's what we got. Next up, PlayStation recently announced a Midnight Black version of the Pulse 3D wireless headset to go along with what I would assume is your Midnight Black DualSense and also probably your aftermarket black PS5, because so far Sony still hasn't actually offered any sort of like official OEM faceplate colors, which I'm surprised by. At this point, well, prior to PS5 coming out, I was saying for a while, like, oh, that's not going to be a thing, because why would they let you take the plates off very easily? We've seen platform holders before offer, different color, user-changeable faceplates, right? And that never really works out. Obviously, that's wrong now because you can take them off very easily, and now we have an aftermarket in place here. But maybe this is more of a year 2 thing, because clearly Sony's very slow on this, where we have 2 different headset colors and now, I guess, technically 3 DualSense colors, right? The stock white one. But it looks nice, this new headset. However, it's really just it's just one piece of plastic that's changed. Or, well, maybe, oh yeah, there's a seam here. There's a seam here, so I guess 3 different pieces of plastic that you're getting, but they did time this very nicely because that PS5 System Software Update has those EQ sound features now that are built into the control center, which that's only for the PS5's Pulse 3D wireless headset. So they timed it well there. I haven't tried it too much, so I'm not sure if it's really like worth it per se. However, I do daily drive the Pulse headset, and so far in terms of build quality, holding up fine. It sounds great to me, but I'm not really an audiophile. I know it's not best in class audio, but it seems good so far. So if you're interested, this is shipping next month, which PS Direct has it listed for a delivery date of October 22nd. Now, we have a disappointing update on the Little Big Planet server thing that was a problem since March, essentially, where Little Big Planet 1, 2, and 3 on PlayStation 3 were taken down because, a weird community problem and people accessing the game and displaying messages, hateful messages to other players. And it was a whole weird, don't even really have to get into it, right? Essentially, there was a security problem, so the games were taken offline. The PS Vita version was still up during that time, I believe the entire time the PS Vita version was playable, but then it was taken down during like a second wave or something. The timeline there is muddy, but the point is, the recent update here is that, the servers are back up for Little Big Planet 3 on PlayStation 4 with a recent patch 1.27. However, the shutdown for PS3, Little Big Planet 1, 2, and 3, also PlayStation Vita as well, this is going to be permanent. The games are done, which is a terrible way for them to stay down. It would have been ideal at least to have them, back up for a little bit and then put out that 6 month to a year final date so people can at least jump in for nostalgia reasons or get their playtime in on that particular platform. For Vita, I think this is probably the most tragic because, that game's a little bit more specialized on Vita. The good news here is that Little Big Planet 3 on PS4, you can play all those community levels, so that's fantastic. So essentially, you've got access to the online, and you can still go back to those other games and play the single player, but still, it's disappointing, especially for Vita. And that is a platinum I am now locked out of because I only had 2 trophies that I was missing, and they were both... They were both community focused. Actually, I could still do 24 hours in create mode, but I can no longer get a level, a published level up to 50 plays. I think that's all I was missing. So unfortunately, I'm locked out of that. It sucks that this is how it had to play out, but you can still play those community levels, so that's good news. Moving on to the Twisted Metal TV series, it's funny that we're even talking about it because we just had all the game rumors, and before that we haven't heard about the TV series since like last year, right? That was just when it was confirmed and we had nothing else, but now we have the actor playing the protagonist, John Doe, which is Anthony Mackie. Anthony Mackie will play as John Doe in the Twisted Metal TV series, so now we can see, with this alongside the Last of Us HBO TV series, PlayStation Productions is not really messing around here. They're definitely trying or making a serious attempt at really handling these correctly. And what that means is just, hiring the appropriate writing staff, getting some big name talent to, play these characters, which I think that alone sort of shows their willingness to, foot the bill for making this happen. You don't necessarily need the high caliber or high profile, actor to play in this. It's just, you can see that there is a genuine attempt to maybe make this work. And for the Twisted Metal TV series, as a reminder, we have Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, the writers on Deadpool. This is supposed to be a action comedy, so it sounds good so far. And we have a short synopsis of John Doe where it says, and I quote here, "Doe is a smart-ass milkman who talks as fast as he drives. With no memory of his past, he gets a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make his wish of finding community come true, but only if he can survive an onslaught of savage vehicular combat." Now, despite all my optimism, which I'm sure a lot of you have picked up on how I, generally speaking, am very optimistic, I'm finding it hard to see how this is going to play out. Just Twisted Metal as a TV show, I don't really know how you go about doing that, but that's not my job. So I can't wait to see how this looks. I'm just struggling to see what this will be, right? But it looks like they're going in the right direction. Now, getting into some updates for some PlayStation Studio games. God of War Ragnarok, we learned a few extra things. Nothing super crazy here. However, the lead story writer for God of War Ragnarok, Matt Sophos, confirmed on Twitter it is going to be one continuous shot like the 2018 game. And for those that maybe don't necessarily know what that means or you haven't played the game just yet, from start to finish, the entire game is one camera shot. So whether you're in gameplay or it transitions to a cutscene, there's no hard cut to a different area or part of what you're looking at, right? It's all one continuous shot, which is pretty cool, and it's easily something you might not realize, but that will be the case for God of War Ragnarok, so that's great to see. Also, on the Captain Kuba YouTube channel, Corey Barlog and Eric Williams, there was an interview here. We didn't learn too much, but we did find out for the Blades of Chaos. there is going to be more moves and combos available in Ragnarok versus the 2018 game, because it kind of, well, what, it takes 10 hours or so to get to the Blades of Chaos, and they just discussed how, you know, at that point in development they didn't really have enough to add a lot of features to that particular weapon, so that should be remedied in God of War Ragnarok. There's going to be more combos and things like that for the Blades of Chaos, so I can't wait to see how that'll feel and play on the 2018 game, which principally, you know, plays a lot different compared to every other God of War, right? And for the point of contention with many when it comes to closing up Norse mythology on this particular game, and in what is really 2 games, right? We had Greek mythology for 6 titles, 3 of the mainline ones. Why are we closing up Norse mythology so soon? So Corey Barlog explained, when you're looking at a 5-year dev time for the last game, and now this one might take close to 4 or 5 years as well. If you want to do another game, that's another 4 or 5 years, and now we're looking at a 15-year cycle for completing and wrapping up one story, which he feels is too long, essentially, right? And honestly, I agree. It's one thing that it's easily overlooked, I guess. And it's a point that has oftentimes been brought up when we say, look at Naughty Dog and say, you know, between Last of Us 1 and 2, you know, if there's a third one, we're talking about well over a decade, almost 2 decades of like trying to tell and wrap up any kind of story that, you know, Ellie's going through or whatever, right? So it's like, I can see how a part 3 would be great, but at the same time, it's at complete odds with me wanting a new IP out of them. And sure, you can hire more staff and do another team or what have you, right? But it's just something has to give, and so that's their explanation here. It's a fair point, right? And I think with a, you know, what is going to be a 35-40 hour game, we can still have something that's really fun, unique, engaging. If they can accomplish all that, you can't really argue against it, especially because it doesn't mean less God of War. It just means no more Norse mythology, and depending on how this one ends, that will dictate, or at least tell us, what the next one is going to be or what it's going to look like. As for Spider-Man 2, we have the lead VFX artist at Insomniac Games, Brianna Lindsay, mentioned on Twitter. She was actually quote retweeting somebody who was comparing the CGI Spider-Man clips to the recent real-time trailer on PS5, and she says, and I quote, "The team did a killer job. Real-time VFX are difficult, but I'm so proud of our whole team for pushing our quality bar." And that is worth pointing out, because between this and also Wolverine, these games are announced as PlayStation 5 only games, and this is kind of what we were hoping to see, at least in what would now be the mid-life cycle point of PlayStation 5, right? That was I guess the only unfortunate thing, really, when we sort of looked at all these early cross-gen games. It's like, well, based on the development timeline, you know, that means we're going to be waiting until mid-life cycle for some, you know, true PS5 only games. And remember, this is not, I mean, this was atypical for Sony. Every other console generation, they would have 1 or 2 releases towards the tail end of the last console, but then first party would pretty much always move over in full force. And of course, you'd always see improvements over time with their software throughout that console generation. So their first, say, PS3 only game was going to look nothing. Well, PS3 might not be totally fair, because Cell is a, you know, something you can highly optimize, but, you know, year 1 PS4 exclusives looked, you know, okay versus, you know, some of the last year PS4 exclusives. Either way, it's still cool to see. Also, the voice actor for Venom, Tony Todd, responded to somebody on Twitter where they were asking how long did they know they were a part of this project. Tony Todd says 2 months or so. Game is massive. That's why it won't come out till 2023. I'm not sure how much Tony Todd can speak on the length of the game, at least in comparison to Miles Morales or Spider-Man, but you assume it's a full-scale game that might be larger than the first one. So, and it's an exciting prospect when, you know, we've got 2 characters now, right? We've got Miles finally coming into his own as his own Spider-Man, and how will they do that when it comes to the narrative playing out. And honestly, I would think that this would be very similar to Rift Apart, where you've got 2 skill trees, but they inherently kind of align at the same time. When you expand on one Spider-Man, swap over, you've got the, you know, similar skill or the same skill unlocked automatically. Certain side missions and mainline missions will be played from their perspective, and it will jump back and forth, say maybe, you know, GTA 5 style. There's a lot of exciting ways that this can go, but I would guess that this game is going to be bigger than the first one. Now for Wolverine, very small but important detail here. Brian Horden, the creative director over on Twitter, confirmed it is a full-scale game, mature tone. And that is what I think everybody wants out of this game. I mean, really, when you think we haven't had a good Wolverine game since, like, what, PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, what was that? Oh, God, what was it called? It's just, you know, there's so much that's changed since there were any sort of attempts at a, you know, Wolverine-only game or X-Men style game. It's just, I think I speak for everybody when it's like, when we saw the trailer, it was like, oh yes, like this is gonna be great. I'm wondering how much we're going to learn all the way up until this thing finally comes out, right? Are we going to have example stories like this where it's a small little tweet here, a job listing here that tells us something a little bit more specific? Or is it going to be like radio silence for the next 2.5 years until we get another trailer, right? Which I would prefer that versus like the little stuff throughout the years. But we are getting what I assume is what everyone wants for this game. Now, getting into Gran Turismo 7, the series creator Kazunori Yamauchi did a lot of talking this past week with Eurogamer, told us a few things, like for example, he responded to the question of, is there going to be a VR mode like GT Sport, where it was that was a very small mode, but he responded with this saying, and I quote, "So regarding PSVR, we're not at a state where we can talk about it yet," which is not a no, and really that's probably the best answer here because there's the expectation that, okay, something is there, but that will be for the formal reveal of the next generation PSVR headset, which I at this point I would be surprised if Gran Turismo 7 didn't have something there and it wasn't a part of that formal announcement. The one thing though is that this game is going to have an online requirement for the single player, which on the surface is alarming to a lot of people. However, this was the case for Gran Turismo Sport for the main story mode. If you're not online, you can't really access or interact with a whole lot of that content outside of like this one specialized mode, which again, keep in mind, I'm not really into the Gran Turismo franchise. I'm just trying to relay the correct information here, but it's just a matter of most people that don't play this game, they're, going, oh, I can't believe there's an online connection, but the people that do play this game, this was like business as usual. They're not even really bringing it up, and they're talking about other things that Kazunori talked about, like the real-time weather or GT Cafe, which is essentially this little area in the game where you can collect cars, and looking at those cars will tell you the backstory and culture and history of that car, that make and model, things like that, which sounds cool. But this game does require an online connection, so when responding to the possibility of that being removed or why is it there, Kazunori said, and I quote, "The requirement for the online connection isn't specific to the cafe per se," that would be GT Cafe, "it's just to prevent cheating overall from people trying to modify the save data, so that's the reason for the online connection." Now, even though I'm not into Gran Turismo, I will be one of those people where it's like, that's not great, because when the servers go offline, you can't play single player content. That's just, it's the worst of the worst, right? And I don't know if that's a matter of them putting out an update like towards the end life cycle of this, of the product cycle for the game, and they remove it, which they haven't done for Gran Turismo Sport as far as I'm aware. So, there's that. The one other thing that he did bring up, though, which I found pretty interesting, is that for this game, they are trying to make it a little bit more accessible, so that might speak more to me and you if you weren't really into Gran Turismo. So he also said, and I quote here, "There are two aspects of Gran Turismo 7. One is to really match and exceed the expectations of traditional Gran Turismo users. The other aspect of that is a game design that caters to the first-time players of Gran Turismo and, moreover, kids that are coming into contact with cars for the first time." Normally when it comes to like a more hardcore community for a particular franchise, it's always like, alarm bells ring off of like, oh, don't make this super accessible, or don't cater to an audience that's not, the people that were buying this game for the last 10, 15 years. But it's a tough balancing act when it comes to like trying to reach more players while at the same time making something that's fundamentally very similar and relatable to what people have been playing for the longest time on that franchise. This is a game where I don't know how you do that really, unless you just straight up set a mode to like dramatically change how the cars move and drive, right? Because Gran Turismo, you just cannot play it like a racer or like an arcade racer. You just can't do it. But again, like for me, I would like to maybe get an appropriate racing wheel with a proper turning radius, and maybe that is where I will enjoy it a lot more. Now, really good and appropriate segue here, but we have a new WipEout game finally confirmed and announced. It's WipEout Rush. It's a mobile game, and it's not even like a true WipEout game, really. So, like in the trailer, you can see it's got this new cel-shaded like comic book style. It's got this like little narrative going on inside of it, and you're not even like really racing, I think. So the way it's described, you're like managing it or something like that, and watching the races play out. But there's a lot of ships you can unlock and things like that. Looks like PlayStation isn't even really involved with this, so Rogue Games is developing, and that's not surprising, right? I mean, no matter what this is, when it comes to the developer or what the game turns out to be, like, you're not going to have first party doing this. You're going to contract it out. It's going to be somebody else. It's going to look inherently different compared to like a console game. Like, so it doesn't really matter what game we're talking about here. A mobile game, if you're watching this channel, is not really going to speak to you. So unsurprisingly, people aren't really thrilled with this announcement, especially because this is coming off the back of like a rumor about WipEout returning, right? Which the original source of that rumor, Special Nick, Xbox Air co-founder, says that, you know, apparently this isn't the thing that he was talking about. Okay, so we'll see. But PlayStation has said before, you know, Jim Ryan said they want to move into the space, and so this might be one of what will be, you know, a handful of games coming out now, and they're going to be unique, different spins on well-known PlayStation IP, and that's what this is. Next up, we have what I would consider probably enough data to really start talking about that new PS5 model, the 1100 series, which, if you recall, this was really a thing in the first place because of Austin Evans' video where he does a teardown and comes to the conclusion that it's worse without really doing enough testing or really much testing at all in the first place. And that's sort of what we talked about, right? There's just not enough there to say if it's worse, bad. You know, there's certain things where it's like, yeah, it's certainly a cost-cutting measure. There's things that are moved around and the heatsink is smaller, but we need more testing. And, well, I think a little over a week ago, which I was going to bring it up in last week's episode, was Hardware Busters International. They secured a console, did some testing. They noticed that memory, I think, was a little bit hotter, but the CPU was a lot cooler, and then there were some questions about their methodology, and then they had to upload a follow-up video. So that kind of got a little muddy. And then, well, once we found out that Gamers Nexus and also Digital Foundry were going to be doing kind of a, you know, collab covering the console, it's like, all right, well, let's wait because, you know, they're going to be very thorough with this. So we have the results from Gamer Nexus video. Steve does really good work, and I really encourage you to watch the entire video if you're that interested, but I will give you sort of a too long didn't watch. It's just that he's very careful about his wording and testing, and he's very proud of his work, so I don't want to have to paraphrase it, but if you want the too long didn't watch version, here's kind of what was discovered essentially. The new VRM heatsink, there's a slight dip in height towards the center of it. He's not entirely sure if there's overall less materials being used, but it looks very close to the last one. There's more full-on contact with the memory modules. The chassis, or basically the plastic shell of the console, it's different, which could imply there's a more refined approach to how air travels inside the console. There's still only 3 fans available, so this was a bit of a misnomer in that first video from Austin where allegedly there was a brand new fan in rotation. I think from launch there has been these same 3 fans going interchangeably. It just depends on what part was sourced for your PS5. There's no guarantee. It's not attached to any sort of model number, but for the testing, the memory modules across the board, they seem to be consistently cooler on the new model. After a more controlled test by removing or trying to remove as many variables as possible by basically mixing and matching PS5 parts to create a testing benchmark, memory still seems to be cooler along with VRM, whereas the SoC is a few degrees warmer on the new model. The big difference seems to lie with the supplied fans, where the newer Nidec fan, which I guess that might have been introduced a little bit later. As far as I know, all 3 were in manufacturing since launch, but that one does a better job versus the NMB one. Digital Foundry tested a handful of games where frame rate is unlocked on fidelity-rich modes and sequences and found no discernible difference, and this is like what we talked about before with like the boost clock thing, right? So it doesn't matter what PS5 you have. In theory, they all should play the same, and that is basically the results they got, where there's a variance across all consoles, but they're very similar. So VRM probably improved, memory modules probably improved, though it is close within that margin of, you know, variance or user error when testing, because as Steve points out many times, you know, there is that margin of where temperature can change even without testing, right? So not only can they not get a full read on the dies, but it's just a matter of like their testing methodology, there's no way they can get a good number. SoC thermals are a bit better on the older ones, but that's again due to a variance to account for. And he also mentions that for the Frankenstein console, where they do have to, you know, completely remove it and expose that liquid metal, he does show that he reapplies the liquid metal, and that alone could make up for a few degrees difference if he say applied it better than, you know, how the factory supplied it. But the real conclusion here is that there's just not much of a difference, really. And that's kind of what I thought this would amount to, or like maybe the new one's slightly worse, if that. And we can see that there's actually slight improvements on the memory modules. And that was like one area where, well, there's one on the board where there was some concern. But this is like, it's just another model revision. It seems like Sony knew that they had some overhead, and this is how and this is the cost down approach that they took for the machine. And also just, it could have been a sourcing parts problem for them as well, because they're trying to make as many of these things as they possibly can. But there's also the notion that copper prices have increased by a lot. So I mean, it's a cost reduction thing. You have to remember that at Sony headquarters, there's absolutely some very talented engineers, but at the same time, there is another guy on the other side of that going, but we can't add this, but we can't do that. Can we knock down this material by, let's say, 20%? And then the engineer has to go back and readjust that, right? There's two people where their jobs are at complete odds with one another. But so far, I would not worry about what PS5 model to buy. If you have the opportunity to get one and you want one, go for it. For our next news story, we've got a pretty interesting leak, I guess would be fair to call it, right? Because this is real information that came out. But on NVIDIA's GeForce Now, their database, which GeForce Now is their game streaming service, somebody wrote a Medium article where they basically accessed this database and they found references and a list of games in there that, it's pretty revealing, right? This is official info inside the database. It's not, something made up. It's not a rumor. This is very much something real that was inside there. NVIDIA even, acknowledged this list and said that it's not a confirmation of any, announced or speculated game or anything like that, right? So they're pretty much flat out denying it and requested that the info get taken down, but it's the internet and we have the list. So the list of games, I mean, there's some pretty interesting things in here, right? Street Fighter 6, Dragon's Dogma 2, Grand Theft Auto remasters, those were previously rumored. A Mirror's Edge remaster, Tekken 8, City Skylines 2, I would love that. Helldivers 2, we're kind of expecting that, but just a lot of stuff that we haven't really ever heard before. But there's also like Mario games on there, and most notably some PlayStation games, which this is GeForce Now, right? So that's where it's a little eye-opening. We got God of War, Horizon Forbidden West, Gran Turismo 7, Returnal, Demon Souls, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Much like the Mario stuff that's on there, it's not, I mean, what can we really say about this, right? I mean, yeah, it's in the database, but it's not a guarantee or a massive indicator that something's happening or going on behind the scenes. At a minimum, we know Sony's going to be porting many PC games out of their back catalog, right? And that's really all we know. So I'm not really sure how much more we can say beyond the fact that there's, some things on there that are probably happening, and there's also probably things on there that we're never going to see, or at least not very soon, right? So I don't really think there's a whole lot of good that can come from speculating. It's just that we know more PlayStation games will eventually find their way to PC, and you're not going to get all these things overnight. That's not how that works. You're going to see them come on a rolling basis, and we'll talk in 5 years and you'll see that was probably what happened. Now, I would say this is probably a more interesting list, which is the PlayStation Showcase when it opened up with that live-action long trailer, which everybody, kind of was like, oh, what is this? Let's get to the real stuff. But, in typical Sony fashion, which they've done before, they had a lot of little references in there, and now it's something that people are really diving into and speculating, what could we see out of that? And these are very purposely, they're purposefully placed. So in there we saw a few things like the infamous karma symbol. There's a reference to Tekken, Final Fantasy 16, a Pac-Man thing was in there. The Sly Cooper logo, that's probably the most noteworthy because we have an ongoing rumor for that. FF7 Remake, Helldivers was in there. It sounds like we're probably getting Helldivers too. The Silent Hill radio, that's another big one in there where there's a lot of hope. Crash Bandicoot, the Wumpa Fruit sticker. So there's recently there's been some press stuff where they sent things out for what is this rumored Wumpa League game of some sort. And I guess the most relatable thing here is that we had a PlayStation commercial have, Crash Bandicoot characters inside of it that we never saw before, and that was very much a nod to Crash Bandicoot 4. So it's not impossible to think that this would be teasing projects that we don't know about just yet. I want the Sly Cooper thing to be real. I really do. I would love for it to happen. So please. But, that's like joining the ranks of all the other franchise, people that love all these other franchises going, when can we get another Silent Hill? And that's at least one rumor that's very much alive and kicking, but also just tearing people apart as every single one of those Silent Hill rumors comes up, and then, bears no fruit. So I will join with the Sly Cooper thing. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was a PS5 roadmap of sorts when it comes to, the first-party software lineup and then the multiplayer projects, and also this rumor, or many rumors, regarding legacy IP returning. Go check that out. And we've been very busy this week because we also did our installation guide for M.2 SSDs in PS5, and also a complete overview of every single feature in that recent PS5 System Software update. So not just the big ones, but every feature in there. So if you want a good overview, go check that out as well. Coming up, I have one project I'm really excited about, and I hope it's going to be ready in time on Tuesday. I'm not sure. We'll see. You'll know when it gets uploaded, and I'll probably point it out very clearly. But until then, that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.